deal with it. But the temptation wasn't of Christ, it was of Satan. So here we need to understand, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. It's a difficult passage to try and comprehend in a way, because by nature I think we in many ways believe that we are tempted by God at different times and at different points. So, sorry, I've got smoke in my eyes. I've been breathing it in for the last 3 or 4 weeks. We're not even supposed to be out here doing this. The government's warned people to stay inside and try and avoid the smoke if you're in the area where it is. It's become quite a significant health hazard. The hospitals are full of respiratory and other problems that are caused by this smoke. But nevertheless, let me say, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. That's a very deep comment, and it's coming from the man, remember, who lived with Christ. So at some point Christ must have ministered to James, or at least spoke to his half-brother, explaining that temptation doesn't come from God. Temptation, as we know, and its destructive attributes when we fall for it, comes from Satan. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Now there's the natural form of evil desire. Let's continue to understand this. There is the natural sociological form, my eyes are really starting to sting, of evil desire. Then there's the religious form that is religious form of evil, birthed out of religious forms of desire, relative to the things we think we need to do or not do to make God happy or stop him from being sad. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Now he's talking to Jews. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights. So James is suggesting that good comes from God, and that temptation is not of God. So temptation in this context, and in most contexts, is pertaining to evil, things that cause evil. And he says there's no variation or shadow of turning with God. God doesn't slip into temptation 1 minute, seeing if someone will do evil, and then the opposite the next. It's complicated, isn't it? Because, excuse me, God created Satan, and therefore God is responsible, ultimately responsible for Satan. Not us, God. And God will ultimately deal with Satan. But the reality of Satan and his demons is a crushing reality, in the sense that why did God allow it to be this way? James goes on to say, of his own will he brought forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. What he's saying there is, he's brought us forth into Christianity through his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, by the word of truth. What's the word of truth? The word of truth is the reality of the finished work of Christ and our faith in that, which has brought Christianity and these early Christians as the first fruits of it. It's not complicated, but as Christianity developed, I suppose we look back to the early disciples and say, well, and think, well, they were the first fruits of this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to live as one of God's children. So then, beloved, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear. Oh boy, it's hard to stop and listen sometimes, particularly when you're in the middle of a conflict and you're trying to get your point across and you don't feel as though you are. The other person, be it a loved one or wife or someone close, is trying to get their point across, and you're just banging heads. Somehow or other inside, you know what they're saying, you know that they're hearing you, but a pride, a destructive form of wanting to be understood and wanting to be heard, just prolongs the argument, just causes the argument to go on and on and on and on, and the next thing, you just couldn't be bothered. You just come to the point where you don't believe that the other person's hearing you, they don't believe you're hearing them, and there's no resolve. It just goes on and on and on. Gee, I wish that wouldn't happen, you know. So many good relationships and friendships have been maimed by this lack of understanding in what we are listening to when we're trying to resolve critical issues, and sometimes even the most simplest of ones. For instance, if you ask a child you're off to work and you ask the child to hang out the washing, this is just a silly example, and they forget, and you get home and the washing is still in the washing machine, and you ask, why wasn't that washing hung out? The next thing, there's this silly argument. What didn't they hear? Why didn't they do it? These are just common things. Now look at this pelican on the pole there, viewers. And then that building in the back's quite spectacular, isn't it, with its sails there. He's a big pelican, that fella. What a beautiful bird, look, shaking the water off himself. And there you go. Welcome to Australia. Yes, when we don't listen. Oh gee, I pray right now that we would listen more carefully and speak more slowly, and that our anger would be more controlled. The big issue in my marriage at the moment has to do with these three things. These are not uncommon problems in a marriage. I'm sure many of you would agree that if only we could be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath, our marriages and relationships would be a whole lot better. And we try so hard not to fall into these traps. Oh, but God, it's hard, isn't it, viewers? Not to be swift to hear, and not to be slow to speak, and not to be slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Well, that's handy to know. That is really handy to know. But the wrath of God, interestingly, whilst the wrath of man cannot produce the righteousness of God, when we look back to the cross, the crucifixion of the Lord Jesus Christ, we know for sure that the wrath of God on Christ at the cross did produce righteousness. Christ did take upon himself our sin and the punishment of that sin through the wrath of God. And it's important for us to know. Therefore lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. Now, filthiness and wickedness, again, there's two aspects of this. There's the social, inherent human nature, which can't help itself to be wicked and filthy. And then there is the evil form of filthiness and wickedness that springs out of thinking that there's something we need to do or not do to make God happy or stop him from being sad. We try and